All right. Well, everyone, welcome. If you have just joined us, we are going to begin. As for some slight housekeeping, during this presentation, all attendees will be muted. We'll have time for questions, so feel free to place them in the chat. The session is also being recorded and will be shared with all attendees afterwards. I would first like to introduce our Chief Marketing Officer, Beth LaGuardia Cooper. In her role, Beth oversees brand PR and marketing strategy and operations for the organization. She also leads the delivery of authority media services for clients in the areas of online media and engagement and public relations. Beth provides leadership direction grounded in a nurturing culture that strikes a balance of performance, efficiency, and innovation. Key tenets of her marketing program include an emphasis on data-driven decision-making, testing and optimizing, use of marketing technology, and innovative approaches to leveraging emerging marketing strategies and channels. So now I will hand it over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jules. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on the definitive guide to finding belonging. And I have with us, as previously mentioned, Dan Berger. And I want to make a note that as you're looking him up on Amazon and buying the book, which I hope you do, you're going to want to look for D-A-N, pronounced Don, but D-A-N J Berger. So it looks like Dan J. Berger. And Dan's an Israeli-American entrepreneur. He mentioned a previous venture with Social Tables, but his newest venture, which I hope we get a chance to talk about, is called Assemble, which is a boutique chain of corporate retreat centers. He previously founded and led a company called Social Tables. This was an event planning software company that was acquired by Blackstone's Cvent in 2018 for $100 million, which gave him a chance to think about his next chapter. And he's quickly at it. So thus the quest that belonging has taken him on. Dan's a recipient of numerous industry awards, including the Pacesetter Award from the Events Industry Council. He holds a bachelor's from Hunter College and an MBA from Georgetown. And as previously shared, he lives with his family in Boise. So welcome. I appreciate you being here, Don.
Thank you, Beth. And for those who we just mentioned New York, I'm going to embarrass her, but the LaGuardia name in Beth's name is the LaGuardia High School, which is probably the most renowned high school for the performing arts. So for anyone who knows much about the arts, it's a very coveted high school. So thanks, Beth. It's been a pleasure working with you and the Forbes team. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. My goal is to make this as interactive as possible. So please do use that chat feature to share any questions or any comments. And whatever you want to talk about, I will take on politics, DEI, bring it on. All right, so I'm going to zoom through these a little bit so we can make this interactive in our fireside chat. But again, I want to just thank everybody for making the time. I can imagine you have competing priorities, and I'm grateful for you spending this morning or afternoon with us. So my goal is to make this as fruitful as possible. Let's get started. My story starts in 1981. I was born in Israel, which is getting a few headlines this past year, unfortunately. But I was actually adopted in Israel by my mom, Ronnie. My mom waited 9 years to adopt me, and it was an arduous journey for her. She didn't know when she was going to be called, so she would travel throughout her life with baby products in the trunk of her car, just waiting for that phone call that someone is ready for her to adopt. And that someone was me. I was adopted when I was 5 days old. And my parents who adopted me, my dad kind of got fed up of waiting. So he left my mom when I was 2. Here he is, pretty resigned as his face. And the reason he's resigned is because the woman to my right is my biological mom, who I found about 6 years ago. And my dad just didn't want anything to do with it. So the first kind of belonging related trauma was this adoption where I lacked a nuclear family. And that kind of programmed me to care about belonging. The second belonging trauma was obviously my dad leaving when I was 2 years old. And then my third belonging trauma was immigration. I immigrated to this country, didn't speak a word of English when I was 8, going on 9, entering the 4th grade. That's where I met Alad Haber, who's also an author. He's been an author his whole life. He's on the call, and he became one of my closest friends at the time. And here I am in or fifth grade, I think, just lonely and isolated. And one of the things I like to mention is that we obviously all have traumas. And the one thing about tra pain and suffering trauma is everybody's pain is at a maximum. So I'm no one to judge your pain, and you are no one to judge mine. But because we are experienced, our pain is at a maximum. So these painful memories for me really made me interested in the issue of belonging. So right now, as you've probably heard Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, speak about year in and year out, is that we have a loneliness problem in this country, and I believe belonging is the solution. And I believe when the loneliness is compounded, it actually creates a belonging crisis where everybody tells everybody else they don't belong here or there, and that creates a much bigger problem. And I think the only solution for it is belonging, and then belonging is a personal journey, in my view, to address any potential loneliness. But unlike what most people say, which is like HR speak or politician speak, it starts with us and doesn't start with some sort of big grandiose slogans. Pete Buttigieg, when he ran for office in 2019, said that we have a belonging crisis, and he's the first person who coined that term. I just want to quickly define belonging. Belonging is really about fit. It's about me telling you that you belong somewhere and you telling me that you belong here, and it's kind of reciprocated. I'll talk about that a little later. But it's the feeling of being accepted as you are, valued for who you are, and included in a certain environment. And that environment can be many different things. We'll actually talk about that in a second. So as I mentioned, a lot of trite phrases like "we belong here," culture, corporate HR programs telling everybody they belong, which is we are all, and the reason why they fall flat is because they're insincere, inauthentic, not genuine, and our sense of spidey senses kind of uh, tingle when we hear this because we know it's BS. Because at the end of the day, we also know this one truth, which is if everyone belongs, no one belongs. Um, it's just It's just something that people are afraid to say, and why a lot of DEI initiatives that start adding and tacking on belonging really fail. And actually, some schools are starting to notice that as DEI programs increase, their actual diversity decreases. And for belonging at work, which is what we're here to discuss, to work or to succeed, employees must have a sense of belonging outside of work first. And I talk about this in the book, and it's very important for everybody to have personal belonging before they have professional belonging. And the way I think about it is everybody's got a belonging tank. This is based off of work that Elaine Parvati and colleagues did in the University of Buffalo. It was called the Sociometer, what they published, and I have built on this work, and it's called the belonging tank. And basically, every belonging strategy that we take on is filled to the proportion of time that we spend on it. And then any empty space in our tank represents potential loneliness or isolation. Um, and the way I think about belonging, now what you do to fill your tank up, it depends on who you are. And the way I think about that is really what I refer to as belonging archetypes. And there are four belonging archetypes. The first is the eager belonger, which is exhibited as a chimp. Some of you may have completed this quiz. And if you complete the quiz on belongingquest.com, which we will send around, you will find out your belonging archetype and how to find belonging strategies that match it. But the eager belonging is represented by a chimp. And if you think about chimps, they're sitting around with all their buddies, they're horse playing, they're kind of building their hierarchy, they're picking each other and grooming each other and doing stuff together, just eager about belonging and they're eager to belong. And that's exhibited by their high need to belong, which is a statistically valid independent psychological construct developed by Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary in the 1990s, and secure attachment. So if you have a secure attachment style and you have a high need to belong, you're an eager belonger. But if you have an insecure attachment, but you still want to belong, you're an anxious belonger. And I think about meerkats for that. You know, they're always popping their head up looking for danger, but they're still doing it with their buddies. And then they go back to their holes and they run around. So that's excuse me, anxious belonging. Then there's this reluctant belonger, someone who's got a low need to belong. In other words, they don't care really if they belong or not, and they have an insecure attachment style. And attachment style, as you probably know, was developed by John Bowlby, and you can take many. There's one on my website, but there's many different forms to figure out your attachment style. And it's basically how you show up in partnerships. Um, and these are reluctant belongers that are represented by snow leopards. Snow leopards are basically living solitarily, and they basically just get together to mate or to be with their family early on. Um, And then finally, they're independent belongers. I think about wolves, and I always think about wolf pack and lone wolf. It's a bit of it's a bit of kind of contradiction. But the idea of independent belongers, they're secure in their attachment style, and they have a low need to belong. So they can do pretty much whatever they want. They can be alone and not be with other people and not need connection with other people, but they still feel secure when they do. So you're now probably thinking, okay, depending on what, and probably some of these are speaking to you as I'm presenting these, and you're probably thinking, okay, well, how can I fill up my tank? Well, there are 6 fuels to fill your tank. The first one is interpersonal relationships. These are marked by deep bonds and secure attachment. Your partner, your close family, maybe your best friend. Then there's collective experiences. These are membership, participation, or affiliation in a collective. For example, if you're part of this series, then you're part of this kind of collective experience. Facebook groups come to mind, book clubs, men's groups, Rotary Club. There are many collective experiences, and these have actually been on decline. And if you watch the new Robert Putnam documentary that came out on Netflix, he talks about this drop in collective experience that we've had. This also includes events, music festivals, being in a crowd, gatherings, and so on. Then there's casual encounters, which are social interactions that give us connection but lack depth, interacting with baristas, saying hi to colleagues, and so on and so forth. There's symbolic bonds, which are connection. These are parasocial bonds. These are connections to someone else without their presence. Think about the celebrities you follow on Instagram, or even anybody you follow on Instagram, people um, people who you have a connection with, but they don't necessarily reciprocate. This can also be bonds with fictional characters. So if you connect with characters in a novel you read or on a show you like I love Peaky Blinders and I love Arthur Shelby and I connect with that character, even though I don't know him. So I go on Reddit and talk about him and whatnot. Then there's esteem building, which are status seeking activities, and that's where we get approval and praise. This can be recognized in your job. This can be waving a flag. It can be driving a luxury car, wearing certain brands, but they make us feel like we belong because we're building our esteem. And finally, there are contemplative practices. This is everything from connecting with nature, connecting with your higher power, staring at the stars, and so on and so forth. So now that we know the belonging fuels, I just want to kind of throw this up. These are the fuels that go along with every one of the personalities. So if you're an eager belonger, you probably want a lot of relationships. If you're an anxious belonger, you probably want a lot of symbolic bonds. If you're a reluctant belonger, you probably want symbolic bonds and micro interactions or just small hi bye acquaintances. And if you're a wolf, you pretty much can do whatever you want. But these contemplative practices in many relationships is probably what you need. So again, the quiz online, belongingquest.com/quiz will tell you this and give you the playbook. And so now we understand personal belonging. Let's talk about belonging at work. And belonging at work starts with a hospitality mindset. And this is the critical path that I've created to help people feel and experience belonging at work. It starts with hospitality, moves to safety, then in safety unlocks engagement, engagement unlocks commitment, and commitment unlocks belonging. And let's look at some examples. So hospitality is a feeling of feeling welcome. Safety is a feeling of not being judged. Engagement is somebody who's eagerly participating. Commitment is someone who's commitment to the organization's success. And then finally, they say, I belong here because of this positive reinforcing critical path. So the way that hospitality shows up is there's warmth in the way employees interact. Employees are open and vulnerable with one another. And then engagement is employees cross-pollinate beyond their kind of best friend at work, so to speak, or beyond their little clique. There's commitment where employees prioritize the organization. They put that over other things. And as employers, we want to see that. And then finally, there's belonging when employees signal their membership to the outside. They communicate where they work, they're excited about the way they work, and they do it in a genuine way. And these are just some of the metrics that you can use to measure this P recognition for hospitality because they're warm and fuzzy about everybody. There's diversity metrics to show safety. There's a participation rate for engagement. They refer other people, which shows their commitment. And finally, they are retained, and that shows belonging. So let's talk about DEI, the third rail, so to speak. And I like to think about Napoleon Dynamite, where Napoleon Dynamite is invited to this prom and he starts dancing like a lunatic. So the first step is diversity, and that's super important. It's being invited to the party. And we want to make sure that our party is diverse. It's representative of the world. And then there's equity and inclusion, which is basically being asked to dance. So you're not just sitting on the sidelines like you did moves or whatever. And then finally, there's belonging, which is separate from this DEI stuff, because that's being as comfortable to dance as you are. And the reason this is different is because you can't tell somebody that they belong. They have to feel like they belong. So I can't make you comfortable when you dance. You have to feel comfortable when you dance. And if you don't, then you don't belong there. So belonging has no place in DEI, and everybody, all the consultants who tell you otherwise, are just blowing smoke. Because belonging is a feedback loop and it involves feeling like you belong and then experiencing belonging. So if you don't feel like you belong, you're not going to experience belonging. And if you don't experience belonging, you're not going to feel like you belong. So this idea that we can just mandate it in a corporate way is absolute malarkey. So the way to summarize this is DEI is a mandate of a smart corporate strategy, while belonging is a feature of a great corporate culture. Again, DEI is a mandate to succeed, belonging is a feature to thrive. And I want to finally end with what I started, that if everyone belongs, no one belongs. So with that, I will pass it over to Beth to have a little chat. Thanks for tuning in,
Yeah.
and please leave questions.
So really powerful. If you would please enter your questions and comments in the chat, and Don and I will be taking a look at those as we continue this discussion. But first, I have some questions for you. Don, thank you so much for sharing this. I think many of us recognize that we're in a belonging crisis. And one of the things that I'd love to get your thoughts on regarding the fact that we have 5 generations in the workplace going on right now. And this is really bringing about different work styles, different viewpoints, different values. And I would love to have your thoughts on how to foster belonging across generations, or a better understanding of what belonging needs may be presenting themselves a little bit more in from generation to generation, if you've seen any of that.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So if I understood the question correctly, it's basically how is belonging show for different generations? So to be honest with you, I initially was going to write this book for young men because men are the ones who are young men who are the ones who feel millennials and down are well, actually millennial men for the most part are the ones who feel like they don't belong the most because of just the changes that are happening in society, just the changing gender dynamics, the changing racial dynamics, and those are the hard conversations no one's really willing to talk about. And what they're being told is like, you got to figure it out, dude. You know. And then what happens is they start disparaging themselves by like white dudes for this or white dudes for that. So um, I then realized when I started talking about my book, which has been a 3-year process, is that I was talking to everybody like, oh, dude, I need that. Oh my God, I need that. And that's why I kind of expanded. I do have a little section about men in crisis specifically. And I really love the work by Richard Reeves in his book of Men and Boys. And he talks about this specific issue. And he has really tangible strategies to fixing it. But to address your question directly, the generational needs, I don't think it's much different because one of the things research has shown us time and time again is that belonging is a fundamental human need. We all need it. So it might show up a little differently, and the way it shows up differently is depending on the persona. The persona is available for everybody, and the persona may change. Your attachment style may change from insecure to secure. You may have a really difficult partnership, so it may change from secure to insecure. So as your belonging style changes, your needs change. But that is completely generation agnostic.
Yeah, really interesting. Um, let's talk. There's a question in the chat that connects our work lives today are not, you're at work and you're isolated in your work, and then you're at home and you're isolated at home. All of your personal and professional life seems to be more intertwined than it ever has before. So the question, Chip Higgins, another member of ours, asked this, is how do we help our employees with their belonging needs outside of the office so that they show up more effectively and, fully at work?
Dude, that's the question. I mean, that's the Chip is 100% right to ask that. And I will start by saying that we need to move away from a work-life balance conversation to a work-life integration conversation. Um, you may have seen the news that the disgraced Chipotle CEO who's just fired famously said, "I don't answer emails after 6 p.m." I mean, what a terrible, or Starbucks, excuse me. The
Yeah,
Chipotle guy replaced him. Um,
right.
what a terrible message to employees, to shareholders. It's just stupid. And the reality is we need integration. I mean, with a hybrid workplace, with a remote workforce, hybrid, there come benefits, which are work as you will, and there come obligations, which is, be present and maybe lean in a little bit. So, Chip, to your question, the answer is to, first of all, managers having these conversations, getting to know their employees. Hey, what do you do outside of work? Hey, what do you belong to? Um, do you have a house of worship? Do you, how do you connect with a higher, whatever? Like these things are not terrible if you ask them the right way. So really getting to know people and making sure that we take an interest in that. And then creating opportunities. In the book, I have a whole chapter on belonging at work and taking these strategies, just like the love languages for the most part, except for physical touch, although high fives are pretty cool. Like love languages apply to work as well. Um, the same thing is true. These paths that I've shared apply to work as well. These, micro interactions, for example, or casual encounters, as I call them, they are basically, they can be Slack messages. So there's things that you can take these strategies and kind of like professionalize them, if you will, Chip. And the last thing I'll say, Chip, is that in order to create belonging at work, we need to, and with a hybrid workforce or a remote workforce, we need to really lean into repurposing real estate budgets to in-person budgets. And that's why I started my new company around um, retreat centers, because with more remote work, we should bring people together and create belonging that way at a team building level. And that's how you create organizational commitment. So I hope I answered your question. Awesome question. Feel free to reach out if you want to discuss more. Happy to. And by the way, just so everybody,
Yeah.
I'm not a consultant on this stuff. So like, this is not to get like business. I don't get paid. I will give free advice all day long. It's not, I'm not here to consult or anything. That's not my path. So I want to just be super clear for those who are wondering. So um, I'm sharing information without literally any expectations. And if you want to consult,
Well,
I won't do it. So I'm not, that's not me.
that's not your thing. Well, we are
That's
going to
right.
talk about your thing before we end in a little bit more detail, your hospitality
Sure,
venture.
sure, sure.
But I just want to call out something you said, which was all about creating conversation. And earlier today, I was listening to a keynote and with a general who has a lot of NATO experience, and he's saying building trust is all about having conversation. Starts with having conversation to better understand people and really where you can find common ground as well as how you can help plug them in based upon what their needs are. So I think that was a really good call out. There are so many amazing questions. I
I just
have
want to
so
say about
many,
trust. So
but
trust, trust. My
yeah,
favorite way to think about trust is three things. It's competency, it's reliability, and it's sincerity. So
yeah.
competency, like can you do it? Sincerity, do you really want to do it? And reliability, do you do it? And that's the way I think about trust. And that's why so many employees, quite frankly, fail us because they don't show that. They're not reliable, or they're not sincere, or they're not competent. And that's why some people don't belong somewhere, is because they fail our trust. And if you're an underperformer and we still tell you you belong here, that's disingenuous and you need to be fired. So that's really the bottom line is employees see the BS. They're like, this person doesn't belong here. They suck at their job. So that's probably the problem is that we kind of create such a big tent that the joke's on us.
Yeah, well said. Well, I have a question then for you because in order to apply some of these best practices in the workplace, I'd love to hear of some examples that you have either from social tables or in environments that you've seen, been part of or observed that we can kind of take a note from. How do we get started on making changes in our workplace that can better incorporate some of these belonging concepts?
Yeah, so here's my book, and I will go to the chapter that talks about that. Um, at the bottom, I talk about integrating belonging into organizations. And the first thing is interpersonal relationships. So making sure there is space. And here's the thing, here's the catch, Beth. We got to make sure that we think about all the different ways people find belonging when we design any program, HR or otherwise. And a lot of people don't think about it. They're like, oh, there's an event. Everybody should go to an event. Not everybody wants to go to an event. And I remember when I was CEO, I judged people who didn't go to my events. I judged people who didn't go to company events. I judged people who didn't show up to happy hour every Friday. And I was wrong. Some people don't want to do that. They don't connect that way. They don't find belonging that way. So interpersonal relationship is that first fuel, and I talk about how to do that. Um, the workplace is a platform for people to find meaningful relationships, and we need to facilitate that. So urging people, measuring people on how much they cross pollinate. Um, and not just creating, oh, the Jewish employee group. What a bunch of BS. You can't just take a bunch of people who look the same and be like, oh, you guys should start a group. That is so disingenuous. Successful employee groups have multiple qualifiers. So it's not just like, oh, all the black people or all the Hispanic people or all the Jews. It's like, okay, maybe it's all the people who play tennis or all the people who hike that are junior employees, whatever. But it's got to be thoughtful. Collective experiences. And this is about just making sure that the people that do thrive in a crowd have that opportunity. Um, so we had quarterly events that did that in different ways. One was a learning event, one was a recognition event, and just have different types of events for the different type of people. And then casual encounters, this idea of micro interactions, creating collisions within the workplace to make sure that those needs are met, like the Walmart, like 5 foot or 10 foot rule where people have to say hi or whatever, everybody acting as a receptionist. There's different things you can do to be casual encounters, symbolic bonds, making sure senior leaders are available, that where you create that one-sided relationship. And they're accessible, and then esteem building, this recognition programs, which are super important for success. So these are all the paths. Again, I'm happy to send this chapter specifically to anybody who wants it. Just email me and I'll send it to you.
Fantastic. I think as far as ROI, you mentioned a couple of different points here. How do you measure where you stand today? How do you and your organization as a leader, what do you do to understand where you're starting at, your baseline, and how you're progressing on this front? Do you
I
have
mean, at the end
thoughts?
of the day, I think retention is the most important thing. And like for me, so here's the thing, like at social tables, we had a lot of belonging, but we had like kind of poor retention. Our attrition rate was 33%, but that's because our average age was 26 or 27. So naturally, when you have a high performance culture and you have young people, they're going to lead to bigger and better opportunities. So you need to balance like retention with kind of other factors. But at the end of the day, I measure retention and I measure like, are we achieving our goals? And if not, it's probably we have a belonging issue because people don't give a shit. So I think it's retention. I think it's the high level goals. And if we do it right,
Hmm.
then we reach those goals.
Yeah, the company goals.
Yep.
So you have a
Whatever it
high
might be.
performing
But I
culture,
mean,
you're reaching the goals.
yep. And universal one will probably be revenue and retention.
Perfect. Okay, great. Another question that a member of our audience has is around organizational culture versus organizational climate. So this person says, for them, organizational culture is a set of norms derived from the business strategy, while a positive climate is what the organization needs to build to make the employees feel welcome and safe. I think has a lot of alignment to your work and things that you say in your book, Don, but I'd love for you to comment a little bit more on that as well.
What was their name? The person's name when we asked that?
Sudhir Singh.
I don't know. Trying to find that question here. Oh, okay. Yeah. So like difference between organizational culture and organizational climate. There's I forget who spoke about it, but there's a VC, an Indian VC, who speaks about this, and he talks about the smell of the place, which is a bit of a funny way to think about it. But it's like the organizational climate's kind of like the smell of the place. Like the kids would call it the vibe. Like, is everybody just sitting there quietly, just clicking away? And it's like you can hear a pin drop. Um, and the organization culture is how people show up. So I would say organization climate is how like the observations you can make and organization culture are the feelings and experiences people have. Um, and a good organizational climate unlocks a good organizational culture. And for you, you said that culture is derived from norms, while climate is how employees feel. Yeah, I think that's another way of looking at it. But I do like that distinction between the two. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. All right, well, you said you would talk politics and the election is coming
Yes,
up.
bring it on.
So, how about your thoughts on how these candidates are doing with respect to their various strategies to um, harness their base and the audience that they need to get elected? Help us with your assessment of how they're doing.
Sure. They both suck. Um, Look, they're both trying to weaponize belonging and think they stand on higher ground. Um, on the Trump campaign, it's a little less subtle. It's a little less subtle. I mean, everything from like red baseball caps to like flags um, are just like screaming belonging or wanting to belong and like tribalism. And tribalism is bad because tribalism is something around hatred usually, and communities around love. So what the Republican, most Republican candidates these days are doing is trying to set very specific lines about who belongs where, and it's kind of a small tent. That's just the reality. Like no migrants. Like it's just I mean, it's just the way they talk. I mean, you may disagree, but it's just the way they talk. You can't argue with that. While the Democrats try to make a huge tent. Everybody belongs, no matter who you are, no matter what your hair color is. Everybody belongs, and that's also insincere. So I think that's the reason why people are so fed up with what's going on is because they just see the insincerity on both sides and the way they try to leverage belonging as a weapon. And in fact, Anna Arendt, who wrote about totalitarianism a year ago, talks about the dangers of loneliness as an autocrat's favorite weapon. Because when people are lonely, they are susceptible to these kinds of belonging. I mean, look, I'll go over there. I'll go to Israel and Gaza. Like encampments are the most basic way to belong. Being in a crowd, being for a cause, like all the protests, those people are seeking belonging. Some of them are definitely fighting for what they believe in, but a lot of them are there because they just kind of like need that feeling. Um, so yeah, I'm just super disappointed in the weaponization of loneliness and people taking advantage of it.
Yeah, right. It's a really interesting perspective about belonging being used as a weapon, and so many things to say there. But why don't we move on to how, um, from a perspective of business leaders, I just want to think a little bit about some of the healthy responses to this being a two-way street. So, you and I, when we had a very early conversation about this topic, and actually the first time I met you over the summer, we were discussing how this is very intentional, how there's work you need to do as an individual that makes this successful. It's not just an organizational strategy that's descended upon. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that because just as we are business leaders, we are also individuals who show up at work. So help us think about this in terms of the requirements of both parties to make it successful.
Yeah, I once talked about this idea that I kind of said this uh, quite directly. If you can't tell, I'm pretty direct. I said, don't bring your belonging, don't bring your traumas to work. Um, but unfortunately, it's easier said than done. And we are all children inside, and we all carry the traumas and the pain we've endured. So it's not necessarily realistic, but it is our responsibility to address these traumas in our personal lives. And if we don't, then they just show up in crappy ways, and they hurt us in the long term. So in the book, I go on to talk about basically, I compare it to the belonging. It's called the quest because it is a quest to find belonging. And much like people talk about the process or the work, I call it the climb, doesn't matter. But you go through stages as you climb a mountain, starting out with the trailhead, which is basically a kind of an inventory, if you will, which is kind of like the part of the step 9 or step 8 and 12 steps. But and I'm in recovery, so I love the 12-step program. Uh, because it does give me a sense of belonging and it does give me a structure to follow. But the first step is kind of the self-awareness, figuring out where you are on that on the belonging uh, quadrant. Um, and then um, and then the next step is really kind of understanding all the belonging paths that are available to you. And if you are willing and are willing to leverage your risk taking, then finding paths that might work for you. And I make recommendations on which paths might work for you based on your persona. And then I talk about kind of scanning your environment and figuring out, okay, this is kind of hurting my belonging. This is kind of helping my belonging. I know that moving to Idaho from the East Coast helped my belonging because I was able to deepen my spirituality. And spirituality is different for every person, but for me, it was about being in nature and being about around slightly less of a rat race. So I talk about environmental scan and kind of changing some environmental factors. And then I talk about some developing some skills that might help you in doing that. And that involves everything from risk taking um, to hobby exploration and a bunch of other stuff. I call that belonging intelligence. So those are the ways that people can do it, and it's very like straightforward in the book. The book is about 220 pages, and it's kind of 40,000 words, so no nonsense, super direct, and you can pick up at any point and kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very, very, very helpful. I appreciate that. When I think about this time of year, a lot of us are probably, not all, but some of us engaged in setting our priorities for 2025, thinking about how we go into next year. And I know you've talked about this and other platforms, but how can we bring the belonging concepts that we're talking about here into goal setting for next year? What are some of the things in our annual goal setting efforts that we can pay attention to with respect to belonging? And that could come from a perspective of strategies or perspective of, kind of an overarching um, perspective that we put onto the goal setting process, or even budgetary. And I know
Sure.
you said something about that with respect to in person.
Yeah. So at the end, believe it or not, everybody's got belonging goals. They just don't think about them that way. So, for example, it might be like spend time more, everybody's like spend more time with family. Well, that's a belonging goal. And the question is like how you integrate that. So what I do, for example, is I kind of think about the relationships I want to focus on, and I just like make plans with those people. Um, so not try to be in touch with everybody. It's about finding the people that mean the most to you. And I like to think about Dunbar and the numbers. Everybody think about the Dunbar number and like they say, oh, 100, you can only know 150 people. And that's what Dunbar says. But actually, Robin Dunbar has many more circles, and I have an illustration of it in the book. And it's about like where are people in your circles. And um, at the end of the day, you have to be in your number one circle. Like you're in your circle. And when you put other people in your number one circle, you can't show up for other people. And and then there's different ways to think about it. But the next one is your partner. And the one after that is your children, because if you're not healthy with your partner, you can't be healthy with your children. Um, but I urge people to think about this new kind of hierarchy of needs that was developed by Kenrick and colleagues out of the University of Arizona, where it's no longer Maslow's. They built on Maslow and they kind of validated it, but they put mate acquisition, mate retention, and parenting at the top as the top three rungs. So I really think about those things at the top of your goal setting. Additionally, taking some risks around uh, where you live, which can influence your belonging, what you're a part of, like maybe leaving certain groups, maybe joining new groups, maybe kind of doing the things that give you belonging. So, you know, thinking about that. If you've been to a music festival and you love them, go to them because they give you. There's research that shows that after a music festival, we're actually kinder and more open-hearted. Like a year later, literally. So these are all things you can do, and it's just about finding little things like that that will increase that fill your tank.
Yeah, interesting. Well, one of the things that you had suggested earlier in terms of filling the tank is collective experiences. Some people have
Yes.
more of a need for collective experiences. Do you think that our ability to achieve that, or maybe it's just how we've achieved it, has changed since the pandemic? I mean, as there have been kind of a decline in in-person social experiences, and we've rethought how we interact. Could you comment on that at all?
Well, research shows that when we are together, our brain waves start syncing. So
Mm,
as a result, that's why learning in a group, usually our brains sync with the teacher. So the syncing of brain waves um, unlocks these feelings and hormones, and that's why it fills our tank. So that's what the research says, is that collective experiences sync our brain waves, and synced brain waves lead to joy.
yeah, yeah. Um, I see that there's the conversation there with David Samuels around mate acquisition and retention.
Yes.
Um,
Well, I don't know if it was public, so I'm not sure if he's comfortable with us because his was a
uh,
note to the panelists.
okay,
But let's not say who
okay.
it was. But somebody said mate acquisition and mate retention as primary goals seems unhealthy practice for some. So I did not necessarily say that. Let me share my screen and show what I'm talking about. So again, back to my book, one of the earlier chapters. Um, you remember this stuff by heart. David Brooks, I think, said writing is 90% reading your own work. Let me find it real quick. Okay, so there it is. So this is the new updated hierarchy of fundamental needs that I've been talking about. So I was just talking about mate acquisition as an unlock for mate retention, as an unlock for parenting, which is for the most biological creatures, their raison d'etre, like why they exist biologically. This is not for everybody, but it's certainly how scientists are now looking at, the hierarchy of needs that was established in 43 by Maslow. Hope
Okay,
that answers your
very,
question,
very,
sir.
yeah, very helpful. Well, I want to turn to hospitality. So your new venture, Assemble, um, why did this come about? Usually the development of a new business model is born out of a need that one sees. There's a gap. There's a lack of this available to us, and you're aiming to fill it. So I'd love to have your thoughts on what was the genesis of the idea of Assemble.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the biggest things happen in the smallest rooms. You're not going to set huge goals in a town hall. You're going to set goals amongst your leadership team or amongst your management team. So a lot of the current solutions that exist, whether it's Airbnb, where you end up meeting under a live, laugh, love neon sign, or sleep in a kid's bedroom and share a bathroom with the guy from IT, like that's not a place for a productive meeting. Neither is a hotel where there are other clients. So I saw this need of like a boutique space where there's just 11, 10 or 12, 10 or 11 rooms for people to get together where it's private yet intimate, and they can, achieve great things in their meetings. And then we've integrated some destination management planning, so we take care of everything for you. So, it's a very different model um, that exists for team building and meetings.
So where, for
And
those of us who hold corporate offsites, where
yeah,
is
so
this? What does
the
this look like?
the first one is in Boise, Idaho, where I live, and that's the flagship. And the goal is to have 20 by 2030. And the goal is to put it in secondary markets to help them kind of, or tertiary markets. Um, so not major cities that are easy to get to from most metros, in order to get people to different places and experience new things.
Okay. Super, super
Do we
interesting.
want to do a lightning round for all the questions that we had?
Yeah. Yeah, I covered a number of them. There was another one about DEI that I think you, in some ways, responded to at different points. But this question from Genevieve was liking the call out on DEI. It's mandate and a smart corporate strategy, but belonging is the future of a great culture. My question: how can belonging be a more comfortable topic in the workplace amongst teams on a more regular cadence in order to create a great culture versus
Great
a
question.
culture that can, yeah, treat well-being initiatives as checking the box?
Yeah, so Stephen Covey, obviously one of the most famous business writers, talks about this, and he says people do what they help create. So I talk about this in the book a little bit, but kind of getting people together to do this stuff as opposed to, corporate mandates from the top. So I remember when Uber was going through real issues, Travis Kalanick came on stage at a town hall and said, "Hey, everybody, we have some terrible allegations here, but we're going to address them with new corporate core values." And he introduced like 11 or 14 new values. And he's like, "We're integrity." It's total BS. Like, I'm not going to believe a leader that says that when I had no part in creating that. So we're having these conversations. And you know what, Genevieve? Most people don't want wellness stuff because it's BS. Like, they don't want that. Like, they don't want you to tell them to go to the gym. Like, they don't want the, free pass to whatever. Like, they don't want to go to a spin class with their colleagues. Although they might, some might actually, some might. But as a these wellness initiatives kind of fall flat because A, they're now kind of crowdsourced, and B, there's much better use of the funds. And in my opinion, the use of the funds is to create belonging on the team.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it's interesting that you say that because it's come up at my office before that we could go do a cold plunge. And I thought that was the last thing that I want to do is a cold plunge with my colleagues. So
Yeah, yeah, it's just like, why would I want to put on a bathing suit in front of people I like have professional conversations with? I mean, it's just so I will say in our retreat centers there is hydrotherapy, but you can do it on your own space and you could wear a robe. I mean, people can, but yeah, it's just got to have options. Um, um,
fantastic.
how much do you
Do you see
think?
this?
Yeah, I just want to talk about Alad's question. How much do you think
Yeah.
an internalized decision to want to belong in an organization leads into a positive experience? As in, does it all come from the person making a decision, or does you pull an otherwise shy person? A lot. I don't think people can or should pull shy people out of their shell. I
Mhm.
think they present opportunities for it, and that's it. Like otherwise, it's just disingenuous and it's actually kind of like abusive. Like, and I think and the shy person may not be a good fit for the organization culture. Then it's that conversation. But yeah, it's not our job as employers to, change people's personality. And that's where I went wrong at social tables a lot.
Yeah. Yep. It's a lost, it's energy not well spent for
Yeah.
one thing too. Well,
Samantha Miller asked about engaging employee belonging. I said retention and revenue. I just think high goals. Um, And then, are there any specific techniques you can suggest for hospitality component for remote work? I think bringing people in person is the
yeah,
best, but they're showing warmth um, and like sincere welcoming is nice. Um, and then Anonymous asked about company fostering belonging in terms of usual political divide. I honestly think the policy of not talking about it, regardless of what happens, is probably the way to go. I leaned in really hard into politics and I ran social tables. Like, I wrote Trump a letter about immigration and I went to all these marches. I just think staying far away from it is, I think, the move. And I think also highlighting that political diversity is important.
very good. All right. Well, I want to turn this back to Jules before I do. Thank you so much, Don. Appreciate your perspective, appreciate your candor as always, and a lot of great conversations here. Really important topic. Hope that everyone has a chance to grab and read the book and employ some of these practices in their workplace and also at home as we continue to work on ourselves. We're all a work in progress. And as Henry Ford
I have
said,
that tattoo, work in progress.
ah, perfect. I didn't even know that. So as Henry Ford said, well, you can't or you can do something, and in both cases, you're right because it's what you think. So it's all about whether you think you can or can't do it, and finding the possibilities where there seem to be constraints. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jules, who is going to walk us through a couple of final thoughts and logistics for getting the slides that Don shared and that we will be sending after this.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Dawn. This was a very powerful and interactive session, so I thank everyone for attending and for joining us and being interactive today. There will be an email being sent out tomorrow, so please be on the lookout. This will include all of Dawn's information to get in contact with him, to take his quiz, to read his book, all of the things, in addition to the recording. So once again, thank you. We will wrap up a few moments early, but to your success, and we appreciate you all. Have a wonderful rest of your your day.
Thank you all so
Thanks,
very much for
everyone.
being present and engaging. Thank you, Beth, for the thoughtful questions, and thanks, Jules, for making this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.